Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Today's discussion is regarding Marhoom Yusuf al-Qardawi rahimahumullah ta'ala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. The passing of Yusuf al-Qardawi in Qatar on Monday 25th September 2022 marks the end of an era in the contemporary Islam. He was a vocal advocate for Palestine liberation as well as for the Arab revolutions of 2011. His passing at the age of 96 ends the career job of one of the most important Muslim scholars of the last century. My first interaction with Marhoom Qadawi was at the age of 13. I found his books in Urdu at my nanny's home, which including the Halal and Haram, Halal and Haram, the Lawful and the Prohibited in Islam. It attracted me as it was different from our traditional Fiqh Books. He wrote this key book in 1960s before I was born. It was commissioned by Al-Azhar University as a guide for the Muslims living in the West. Perhaps most important book in 1982 work was Islamic Awakening between Rejection and Extremism. Then another book approaching the Sunnah, Comprehension and Controversy. The style of his writing was unique. It was highly straightforward. He strayed away from the relatively obscure language of pre-modern Islamic legal manuals to write a book that could be read and understood by the layman. I was fortunate enough and blessed to meet him 4 times. First, I saw him and met him in 1981 during my studies at one of the famous Indian Islamic institution, Jamiatul Falah. Then 3 times in London. I do remember his speech, which was in Arabic. He started his speech with his own poetry, as he was poet. He said the words Ya akhi fil hindi aw fil maghrib, Ya akhi fil hindi aw fil maghrib, ana minka anta minni anta bi. My brother in India or in Morocco, I am from you, you are from me, you are in me. This was the starting point of his speech. Observing his physical stature, commanding voice, and brilliant oratory meant that he would be seen and heard. In reality, millions across the world heard him, loved him, and were influenced by him. Born in 1926 in a village, Safat Turab, in the Gharbiya province of Egypt, in a poor farmer family, al-Qaradawi went to study at the prestigious Al-Azhar University in Cairo. From childhood, he was also associated with Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamic organization founded by Imam Hassanul Banna Shaheed rahimahullah ta'ala in 1928. Its aims were al-Ardu lillah wal-Hukmu lillah. The land belongs to Allah and thus the rule of Allah should be implemented. These two institutions, Al-Azhar and the Brotherhood, have played a decisive role in his formation as a scholar and as a Muslim activist. His active association with the Muslim Brotherhood caused him imprisonment repeatedly in 1940s and 50s, experiencing torture at the hands of his jail authorities. Indeed, recognizing the significance of his scholarship and influence, Al Jazeera dedicated a weekly program on which al-Qaradawi began participating in 1996 nearly 17 years, then tens of millions of people were watching it and benefited from his knowledge and experience. Al-Qardawi was perhaps the most influential Islamic scholar in the present day world. He was also a jurist. He sat on many fiqh councils across the world. He condemned the 9/11 attacks in the United States and backed the pro-democracy uprisings against the corrupt leaders during the Arab Spring. He was a courageous leader. He never hesitated in standing up for the truth. Dictators of the Muslim world were terrified of his influence and sought to silence him by imprisoning him and sending him into exile. But his principled stance against tyranny, zulm, udwan, oppression, and the injustice never changed, and he was always a powerful advocate for peace, justice, and freedom. His methodology and approach in Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, in most of his publications, Qaradawi called for the middle way, middle path was his approach, al-Manhaj al-Wusta, in the Sharia. In his fiqh works, he repeatedly condemns those who are mutashaddideen, extremists, and mutasallilin, who always were looking for the reconciliations. He always chooses the middle position between these two situations. He addressing current Muslim problems, he said that a Muslim scholar cannot set himself free from the classical legacy. According to him, real Muslim scholars must exercise real ijtihad by examining the classical legacy, that is the evidence. A scholar should not confine himself to one school of law and abandon others. It could be said that the intellectual consistency surrounding al-Qaradawi's fiqh discussion has received substantial intellectual appraisal, although not excusable from the criticism. He strongly advocates for ijtihad and tajdeed, renewal, in religious matters that is flexible in nature. His remarkable contribution in Sharia and Fiqh Islami has been acknowledged by many scholars and intellectuals across the globe. He said that Sharia as a way of life should not be seen as a burden to humankind, rather should be pictured as a bliss to the whole universe. It was his stand. With his comprehensive understanding of Islam, he wrote and spoke about a wide range of issues, from theology and religious practice to democracy, freedom, intolerance, coexistence, Palestine, and climate change, all from Muslim perspective. His views frequently provoked controversy both in the Muslim world and in the West. After the attacks of 9/11, which he vocally condemned, he issued a joint religious decree encouraging Muslim servicemen and women in United States Army to serve in Afghanistan. He also called Muslims to fight Americans in Iraq following the 2003 invasion and claimed that Islam justified Palestinian suicide bomb attacks against Israelis during the second Palestinian Intifada that began in 2000, which saddened many Muslim scholars across the globe, as Islam does not advocate or encourage for the suicide bombing. In an interview with the BBC in 2004, he said, "I consider this type of martyrdom operation as an indication of the justice of Allah Almighty. However, he revoked his earlier fatwas that it was need of the time. He would retract the fatwas and apologize for it years later. Although he was advocating moderation and spoke theologically against the extremist narratives, he wrote heavily against takfir, but some Western and Gulf states branded him an extremist. By contrast, in the West, he gained controversy and travel bans for supporting the use of suicide bombing. He would subsequently reverse his position, citing changing circumstances. Given his long career in the public eye, he will probably be most remembered for championing a Palestine cause and agitating the Islamically inflected democratic reform in the Middle East and elsewhere. Whilst neither of those goals has been achieved so far, his example is likely to inspire future generations of Muslim activists and scholars for years to come. In early 19th, Qaradawi has repeatedly called for ijtihad in two areas, especially the area of business transaction and the area of science and medicine. These are the two modern areas that need extra attention by modern Muslim scholars. These problems have not existed in the past. In comparison with hundreds of ulamas and scholars who emerged from traditional religious institutions as they built up their credentials and popularity, in strict Muslim clerical terms, Qaradawi was more of an intellectual than a traditional clergyman. Regardless, he went on to become one of the most popular scholars in the region and beyond, including in the West. Qaradawi was famous and popular, and his reputation helped enshrine his ideas in the minds of millions. His progressive fatwas become grounded in the mainstream far more effectively than those of much more notable scholars of the present day world. Now that al-Qaradawi rahimahullah ta'ala has returned to his creator, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it would be great for us to read his books. May his sins and shortcomings be overlooked by Almighty, and may he be granted the companionship of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, martyrs and the righteous. أقول قولي هذا واستغفروه وهو